do this. So it is our last week on doubt. So we talked about Moses and Peter previously, and a lot of their doubting had to do with kind of their own abilities. Either he was worried about, going back and having to speak, or Peter walking on water. So we were looking at their doubts and what they themselves could do, even though God had already kind of commanded or invited them into that. This week we're going to be looking at Sarah, and I think she has a few more overlaps with Thomas because both of them were kind of doubting what they knew to be reality. Thomas knew people didn't raise from the dead, and Sarah knows that once you're past a certain age, you don't have kids. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today, is more kind of questioning those reality pieces. And there's a few different ways that we're going to talk about it. Let's see if we have... Okay, so unfortunately, I tried to get my Big Fat Greek Wedding quote, and I couldn't get it on time. Have you guys seen my Big Fat Greek Wedding? No? Oh man, it's a throwback, but it's good. And essentially one of the lines is this girl who's I think like 30, and her dad is telling her, you need to just get married and make babies. You look so old. And so the whole movie is about her actually, getting married and making babies, but not because her dad told her to, just because she actually found someone she loved. But that's not the point. The point is, we're going to be looking at Sarah's story, and she lived in a very male-dominated society where her job was basically to get married and make babies. So the fact that she has been barren all this time is kind of a big deal, and it would probably have been very stressful for her. But we're going to read the passage, and just keep in mind that this does kind of come from that male perspective. So we won't actually get to Sarah in this passage until the very end. So we are looking at, we're still in Genesis 18, 1 through 15. So it said, where is your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Spacebar, let's see. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where did Jeff go?
He has to go back to lead worship at the very end.
Because he's singing?
Mm-hmm.
Why is he singing?
Because Kyle's not here.
Is he okay?
I'm assuming so. I think he just took time off.
Oh, okay. I thought that he...
I was not up to date on that agenda, so I don't know confidently. But so I want to look at a few different things. Like I said, this context is in a very male-dominated society where in Genesis and in the story of Abraham, we know that God has promised Abraham to be the father of many nations. But he doesn't necessarily directly say anything to Sarah about it until this passage. And so Sarah kind of wrestled with this. And there were some decisions that she made that probably weren't the best. There were a lot of difficult decisions that she had to face and figure out what to do with it. But even throughout all of the stories in Genesis on Abraham, Sarah's always right there. She's along for the ride. She actually ended up getting married to a few kings because they lied and said that she was his sister to protect him. So, I mean, she was really a trooper. She tried her best. She was faithful to Abraham and in turn kind of faithful to God. But it sounds like up until this point, there weren't necessarily a whole lot of direct interactions between God and Sarah. So, there...
Guys are the ones in the Bible. There's a lot of guys that are ones that God talks
Yes. Yeah.
Back then, guys were like the dominant.
It was,
And if
yeah.
the girls were not
There
doing
was
what
one
they wanted,
female. There was a female
But
basketball.
even though Sarah is a female in a male dominated society, she's actually even listed in Hebrews as one of the faithful people. So it's not like women are completely overlooked. It's just that in the Bible, we do have to kind of take that context that this is the age that it was written in and kind of the culture of that time. But talking about doubt for Sarah, I'm gonna cover 3 things. You ready? 3 things. So we're gonna talk about the risk of hope. We're gonna talk about control, and we're gonna talk about stepping outside of our comfort zones. Okay. So number 1, the risk of hope. Now, for Sarah, being a mom and having a family was not something that was only expected of her, but it was probably something that she wanted as well. So to go through that many years and that much frustration of knowing that she can't have a child would have probably been kind of devastating for her. She might be looked down upon by, other people in her community. It could be hard for her if that was, growing up, she was always told your expectation is to be a wife and mother. If she can't fulfill that, that probably would have been pretty painful for her. So when things are outside of our control, like, not being able to have a baby in her case, it feels easier or almost safer to doubt rather than have hope, because there's little that you can do to control the situation. It's like winning the lottery. You don't have that much control over it. You can try and buy the ticket, but ultimately it's just going to be a bunch of random numbers that gets chosen. It's not something that you can kind of do in your own steam. Whereas like if you go to college, you can show up, you can put in the work, you can get a degree. That's a lot more tangible. But for Sarah, this is something she has been trying for, and she doesn't have a whole lot of control over it. So in that case, it's almost easier to doubt and say, oh yeah, that's probably just never going to happen, because she can kind of make peace with it. If she still has hope that it could happen, it can be that much harder for her when it seems like, month after month, year after year, it's just not something that's in the cards for her. Number 2. Control. So Sarah had some interesting moments where she was very frustrated, and it was hard. It was hard for her to hope. It was easier to doubt, and she wanted to try and control the situation in some regards. Because when we're faced with circumstances that are outside of our control, that make us nervous or uncomfortable, we naturally want to seek out ways that we can kind of control the circumstances so that we feel better. So what we see with Sarah is she kind of was frustrated. We've been trying to have a baby. This isn't happening. So tell you what, just go have a baby with Hagar, who was her servant. So that was essentially Sarah's choice. And it was her trying to control the situation of, well, if I can't have a baby on my own, then here, I'll make sure that you have a baby, and here's how. Now, the unfortunate thing is this plan completely backfired on her, because she just thought, it's okay, Abraham will get a son, and that's all that matters. But as soon as Hagar, her servant, ends up having a baby with Abraham, then we're told in the Bible that Hagar really started to resent Sarah, and they started having a lot of tension, to the point where Sarah actually asks Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. So here she tried to control the situation in what way she thought would be kind of the best outcome from her limited perspective, and it epically blew up in her face. So that's always something to think about too, is how much do we try and control situations when we feel so out of control? And in those moments, is it really the best choice for us to try and control them? Or is it something that will most likely backfire in our face? So just something to be thinking about. We can talk about it a little bit more. But number 3, stepping outside of our comfort zone. So when we're looking at Sarah and she's saying, will I really have a child now that I am old? It's for her, you kind of have to think, when you think about old people, some of them can get kind of stuck in their ways. They have their routines. They have the way that they like to do things. They don't necessarily like to rock the boat a whole lot. And so here, Sarah is, I think she's like 90 something, if I remember correctly.
No way.
Yeah, 90 something.
They're older back then.
Well, yes, but still 90 something, okay? So here she's lived 90 something years without a kid, and now all of a sudden she's gonna have a baby. That is a major life change, and one that she may have had very mixed feelings about, because yeah, this is something that she's wanted for a long time, but babies are a lot of work. And by 90 something, I'm imagining you've got to be tired already. So there's
If you had a baby when you were 90, your kid would think would be like, you would be as old as your kid's grandparents.
Exactly. So that's the big deal of this situation. So for Sarah, she's probably already just kind of assumed her fate as this barren old lady who's not going to have kids. So if she's kind of been in that mind frame, this is a complete mental shift that now she kind of has to get used to. Babies are tough. They require a lot of work that she may or may not feel ready for. And it really requires all of her routines, her expectations, and patterns that she settled into to be shaken up a bit in order to make room for this, to accommodate for this. And sometimes I think it's easier for us to just keep the things the way that they've always been rather than step out into circumstances that might be a little bit more uncomfortable. But what I think is really interesting about most of the doubt stories that we've been talking about is there's almost always this call to action. Moses had to go to Egypt. Peter had to get out of the boat. Sarah had to, actually embrace the fact that she was going to be a mom, even though it was probably something that was exciting and scary and uncertain for her. So there's a lot of emotions that go along with doubt. And so now she has to figure out, okay, she's doubting that God can do this in her life because has she seen anything else that has told her that this will actually happen? I mean, I'm sure she's tried millions of times before to have a kid and it's never happened. So how do you continue to hope for something that you've never seen? It can be pretty hard. So when God literally shows up and says, you're going to have a baby within a year, I think she has, some decent reasons to doubt. She's never seen that happen before. And we don't quite know what kind of relationship she had with God. She's always followed Abraham and trusted that, he was the God of Abraham. But I think even when we're looking at the passage initially, God is talking to Abraham about Sarah. It's not until Sarah laughs and then lies about it that God directly addresses her. So there's a lot of pieces to it that she kind of has to wrestle with and that she has to come to terms with and take action in. And I think that can be uncomfortable even for all of us. There are things that we hope will happen that might be a risk. There are things that we try to control because it feels safer than just trusting that God can do it on his own. But we're always part of the process. That's the beauty of, I think, Christianity is God always calls us into his plans and his kingdom. He wants to use us. So even in those moments of doubt or when we have a lot of mixed emotions, we have to keep that in mind. We are still active participants in these stories. Just like Moses, just like Peter and Sarah and Thomas, it's fine to have doubts. It's how we respond to those and trust in God in that process that I think makes the difference. So that's kind of what we're talking about for doubt and for Sarah. Did you guys have any questions? I'm sorry, people on YouTube, I don't have the thread, so I can't see if you have questions. But I trust that you do and that they're good.
Seems like what Sarah's mostly doubting is like what God can do, unless that it's actually God talking to her.
Okay. Yeah.
Like that would be something that I would doubt. Like, wait, is this creepy voice in my head actually God? However God was talking to them. Well,
Yeah, so here I'll actually read it because Jeff and I were having an interesting conversation about this. So we picked up in verse 9, but verse 1 through 8 is actually these people showing up basically to Abraham and Sarah. So it says, the Lord appeared to Abraham near the trees of Mamre, I'm assuming is how you say it, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you will all wash your feet and rest under the tree. Let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed and then go on your way. So they say, very well. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, make some bread. I'm summarizing. And then he ran to the herd, selected a choice tender calf, gave it to the servant, and prepared it. So essentially, there are these 3 travelers that come along. And initially we say, oh, it's the Lord that appeared to Abraham. But then it talks about these 3 men that are basically hanging out under the tree, eating a meal. And then that's the context.
The Lord has 3 parts.
There you go.
It could be like Jesus or Jesus' part or something. Like, the Lord's Trinity, it could be just like the
Yeah.
Son and Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So we don't know exactly what that dynamic was, but we know that they were physically there. So that's kind of strange that, all of a sudden you have these 3 guys show up and one of them says, you're going to be pregnant and I'm going to be right because next year when I come back, you're going to have a son. That's
Does he come
a
back
lot.
this year?
I am assuming so. It's God and he said he would, so I would imagine. But I don't know. But there's a lot going on. Like if you're Sarah and you just have to trust this, I could see why she doubted. What do you guys think?
Well, if I was like her,
Mm-hmm.
then I'd be like, is this a trick? Because I've never seen God before.
Yeah.
As in, ever.
Yeah, and as I was reading it, how did they know that it was the Lord? And then in different parts of it, it says the Lord, but then it just says these 3 men, but then it's the Lord speaking to Abraham again. So there's definitely something there. I don't know all the details, but it is very interesting. And you can imagine that it would probably be another layer of complexity that Sarah kind of has to navigate and figure out. But
And I think also with Sarah and her situation, I think probably came a time of that she really knew that God was the one talking to her.
mm-hmm.
Because in the midst of all that insecurity, it's just a force much greater than her
Mm-hmm.
that is telling her, yes, you're going to be a mom.
Yeah.
So being able to accept that.
I hope Isaac was a really cute baby.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Bella brings up a really great point. I think even in our own lives, we can trust that God is talking to us. We can trust that, what we're hearing or anticipating is from God, but do we trust him to actually do it? Wasn't that what you said? Am I getting it right?
I said if I wouldn't know if it was actually God or not, or just me hoping for him and stuff.
Okay.
In that situation.
Yeah, so kind of that risk of hope. Is this really God? Is it really going to happen? Or is she just going to get her hopes dashed again if it doesn't, come true or come to be? Do you guys ever feel that way? Like you don't want to get your hopes up about something?
Yeah.
That's a very quick yes.
If I'm asking someone at school if he wants to sit with me at lunch,
Mm-hmm.
then he's like, no, I'm gonna go sit with my friends. I'm not really that surprised because he's the popular guy. He's that really cool popular guy.
Mm-hmm.
And always hangs out with the cool people, and I'm not one of those people. So
Okay.
I didn't really expect it. I just wanted to see if he would.
Okay.
It's sort of not expecting it to happen, but trying anyway.
Got it. So is there a difference between willing to take risks even if you're not expecting something to happen, or being told, yes, this will happen and you have to believe it or you have to trust it? What do you think is easier?
And taking risks and those
The taking risks to know it's not going to happen. Why would that be the easier one?
Because you can, well, it depends on the thing. Like,
Okay.
you just ask one of your friends if they want to stay with you at lunch, then it's okay if they don't. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a big catastrophe. But if it's something really huge, like
Like
you
having a
think there's
baby.
or there's a giant cliff, there's a toboggan canyon at the bottom, but you don't know that,
Mm-hmm.
and your friend tells you there is, but you're not sure about it. You have to trust it and just jump off.
Yeah, that would be a big risk.
It's delicious.
Hey, but at least if they were lying, you wouldn't hurt as much. You just die.
You would just die. There you
Unless
go.
you
That's
both
very
almost die.
optimistic. If all else fails, you'll just die.
But it would be like some of the bears at school, right? Anyway, kind of. Like, what if your teacher says, I know that you can do something, and you're afraid of it? Whether it's writing a poem or something that you struggle, but maybe you have that, you might be able to do it. Would you do it?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you take a risk and start a land war with Asia and believe that you would win?
No.
Yes.
Okay, so what about the control aspect? Do you guys have any little things that you've noticed, like you want things a certain way, or you try to kind of Bella's shaking her head. Yes.
I don't really care.
You don't care, Bella. Any examples you can give us of?
Weird thing where I don't like my brothers touching my bed.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Yeah. So,
I don't like whether
so you try and control the situation to make sure that they don't.
Yeah, I let them in my room, just like not on my bed.
Yeah.
Step on the rug with their shoes.
No, I gave up on that one.
I gave up on that one. Yeah, so there, I think no matter what age you are, there's always something that we try to control, you know? And it could be little things like nobody touch my bed, or, you know, big things like have, you know, a baby with your servant. But I think it's always good to keep in mind, like, why are we doing those things? But any other questions on doubt? We've talked about it for what, this is the 4th week now? Anything that stood out to you? Any doubts that you have about doubt?
Doubt that you have about doubt.
Yeah.
Well, you know how you said not to get your hopes up?
Uh-huh.
There's a YouTube event that I like.
Yeah.
I'm getting my hopes up about it.
Uh-huh. That it would happen again?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good example. I wouldn't doubt that it would happen, you know, sometime again. But keep holding that hope, Alex.
No. That wasn't as much fun as I thought it
Like, I didn't keep my hopes up about having a Halloween event at school,
Uh-huh.
but then there was, and I was like, I think it made it a bigger deal than it was when I wasn't hoping for it. I
Yeah.
wasn't expecting it, so it was like a surprise.
Yeah, and I think with Sarah, I mean, this is something she probably was hoping for how long, and then all of a sudden somebody says that it's going to happen. I think it's natural to be like, no, it's not. No, I want that too much. I don't think that's going to happen. And kind of try and, you know, keep yourself safe and keep the hope bar pretty low, just in case. You can hope for the best, but plan for the worst type of situation. So, but I'm glad to hear that you finally are having a Halloween event at school.
We're just wearing our costumes on Friday.
Yeah.
What's your costume? I'm either going to be a Harry Potter student from Ravenclaw or Gryffindor.
Yeah.
Probably we can wear
She made her own entire costume. Well, she made her entire costume.
With the wings, right?
No, that was something else. She's making her entire Zelda costume. And she made it
Oh, yes.